as we heard there, more questions now the bill has been published. So what questions does the bill raise for you?
Well, the thing to remember is that in his budget address, the minister said this was seeking to tax profits, trade and property, specifically referencing off-plan, what he calls speculators. Now, the bill was finally gazetted on the 25th of July. We didn't see this at the time of the budget. And the way the bill is structured and the way it's worded, it's not very specific as to how things are going to be taxed and the mechanism. And it is drifting into an area which we call in the accountancy speak capital gains tax, which is something that Gibraltar historically has never had. Now, I have no problem with him wanting to tax property speculators, and this idea that the GSD are somehow defending the rich and the wealthy property owners is nonsense. I mean, we're not about taxing the least able and protecting the wealthy. And I would remind Mr. Feetham that it was his government that tried to impose the car tax on the people, and the people demonstrated outside Number 6. And, you know, it was his government that reduced tax by 2% on those earning above 100,000. So to come up with this crazy idea that somehow we are the people who want to tax those least able to afford it is absolute nonsense.
This is not comparable to the car tax, though, is it? It's quite different.
Well, it is in the sense that it's taxation. Now, he says, oh, the government's only taxed for purposes of education, healthcare, etc. Well, it taxes because, frankly, it can't control its budget book. It's spending too much money, and therefore it has to raise taxes. I mean, the sorts of things the government has been doing is like hiring a private jet for the chief minister to fly down from Brussels. That is what he's raising taxes for.
So would you support this if it was more specific, if it targeted those off-plan investors, for example?
I have messaged Mr. Feetham privately, and I said, look, this bill, if what he's trying to do is target those who are speculating in off-plan purchases, I don't have a problem with that. We don't have a problem with that. But it has to do what he says he wants to do. The way the bill is drafted at the moment is far too wide. It seems to catch everybody who owns property in Gibraltar. I don't think that's what he said in his budget speech.
So ultimately, the aim, whether you think it's specific or not, is to make homes a bit more affordable for families by bringing down, you know, investments from those wealthy spectators, as he's put it. Whether or not it's because they struggle with cash or because it's not specific enough, as you say, do you think it will have that desired effect? Will it help those families?
Well, ironically, it may have the opposite effect.
Why is that?
Because it may mean that less properties are built, in which case it will have the opposite effect. There will be less supply, and therefore prices will go up. I mean, the minister has to keep an eye on this is the other point I wanted to come to, on inwards investment. You know, Gibraltar needs to attract inwards investments at this time. The sort of signals he's sending out at the moment, frankly, are not the ones that would be conducive to businesses wanting to set up in Gibraltar. He has to be very careful. Now, look, I'm fully sympathetic with what he wants to do in terms of taxation, but he can't tax without an eye on the economy, and he can't tax without having an eye on controlling spending. And unfortunately, he's the Minister for Tax. He's not in control of spending. And neither, in fact, can he tax without the permission of the Chief Minister. But he has to be very careful in how he does these things. And tax, and it's a very boring subject, so I accept that. But he can't tell the people it's too technical for them to understand. Yeah? There are people out there who do understand.
In that statement today, you mean?
Yes.
In that statement today, the government also said that the GSD, yourself in this case, were effectively protecting the interests of substantial property owners at the expense of the wider community. How sympathetic do you think your position is with the wider community if you're arguing for these taxes not to be raised? They can't afford property.
I could be very sympathetic with the wider community if I suggested a 10% windfall tax on all lawyers. I'm sure the wider community would be very happy with that. But the question is it good for the economy? And why is he raising this tax in this way? And taxes have to be fair. Bear that in mind. Yeah? I'm sure lawyers would feel terrible if I suggested we do a 10% tax on them tomorrow. But in the same way, there are people who have made investments in Gibraltar over 50 years who may say, well, this is unfair because you've given us no notice, has been applied retrospectively. If he wants to go after the speculators, go after the speculators. But be very careful as to how you draft your tax laws.
Okay. Very briefly before we go, will you be voting for or against this bill when it's brought to Parliament?
Well, look, I've suggested to the minister that he needs to make amendments.
If it's amended to your liking, will you vote in favour?
If he makes amendments which make it very, very specific and targeted to exactly what he said in his budget speech,
then we
will then have a look at it.
You'll have a look, so you won't necessarily vote. Okay, all right.